one thing that stood out to me today was the United Nations asking central banks to stop raising interest rates. The pound in the UK has dropped heavily against the dollar, and that causes a number of issues itself. But I saw a chart, I think it was Preston Pierce who put out, it said the US dollar versus all these other currencies. It seems globally everyone is kind of fleeing to the dollar, and currencies are crashing everywhere. So my first question is a double question. What is the negative effects globally of a high dollar, but also therefore are there some negative effects for the US as well? And what do you think about the UN essentially meddling in policy?
Well, just to level set for our audience. So the reason why how all this is related is that when you raise interest rates in your country, you make that currency more attractive because if you buy treasury bonds, if the interest rate on treasury bonds goes up and then you buy treasury bonds and in essence lending money to the U.S. government, you're getting a better interest rate on that. That makes the U.S. dollar more attractive because those transactions are happening in U.S. dollars. And so that's why the U.S. dollar has appreciated relative to other countries, because the U.S. has been more aggressive than other countries in increasing its interest rates to deal with inflation. So that's a good thing overall. I mean, we can, as we've done, we can criticize the Fed for its execution, but better late than never to the solution of higher interest rates. So that part is at least good. But to your point, as a result, countries that export to the United States, which is a lot of the world, the cost of their goods and services that they're exporting to the United States have gotten more expensive, and that harms their economies. If you're an export-oriented economy in particular, if you're a T-shirt maker in Bangladesh, say, and your T-shirts are now more expensive. Well, actually, I have that completely reversed. Actually, when the dollar is more expensive, it actually works the other way.
Yeah.
Excuse me, pardon me. So it's actually U.S. exports, or that U.S. exporters are the ones who complain because their goods and services become more expensive to the rest of the world, and so that may be the thing that these other countries are complaining about. Actually, their exports become cheaper, which is good for their economies in general. But if they have to buy goods and services from the U.S., they become more expensive. Now, another problem that's sort of a second layer problem is there are a number of countries, particularly in Latin America and the Caribbean, that actually have their currencies pegged to the U.S. dollar. And those countries, they basically have outsourced their monetary policy to the U.S. And so when the dollar becomes more expensive, their exporters have a problem because all of a sudden they're transacting in dollars as well. So that I'm not sure exactly who in the UN has been pushing the UN to take this position. If it's the dollar-denominated countries, it's pretty easy to explain because they're the ones who are basically having to see their exports.
But there's not many of those.
There's not many of those. So it could be the reason, but...
Can you dig the article out?
Yeah.
Here we go. Let's just essentially read in. There is time to step back from the edge of recession.
So it's more about the broader GDP growth, the recession piece, right? Yeah. So
I'm just going to read this for the audience.
Please.
We have the tools to calm inflation and support all vulnerable groups, but the current course of action is hurting the most vulnerable, especially in developing countries, and risks tipping the world into a global recession.
Yeah.
So
it's their concern is then that if there's an overall recession because interest rates go up, then that harms all economies, including third world economies or however you want to describe it.
But this is the Keynesian thing where the idea you can't have recessions. I fundamentally believe you need recessions. You're less likely to have recessions if you aren't meddling so much in the economy in the first place, right? But if you're going to try to fine tune everything and then you misread inflation because your data is wrong, and inflation is far worse for everyone than a recession. Inflation is much, much more damaging in the long term because, even if inflation is zero next year, we've still had an increase in our prices of 18% over the last 2 years. We discussed this last night, didn't we, Danny? This came up. What was it you questioned?
It's not that I questioned it, but I watched a video of some economists, like traditional economists, who were claiming that a sustained period of inflation is better than deflation.
Yeah, that's another one of these expert theories that deflation is bad. Now think about it. Are you mad when your cell phone or your smartphone gets cheaper? Are you mad when your laptop gets cheaper?
Find that chart. You'll probably know this one. Go on to Preston Pish's Twitter. He put out this chart recently which shows what
Right.
What's going up in price, what's going down in price. And it was all electrical consumer goods that are all dropping in price.
Right.
And it's healthcare, education, food stuff that's going up in price.
We have a chart like that. So
maybe it's from you.
So there's a couple of things to say about this. So to give a credit to the argument, here's why economists believe, mainstream Keynesian economists believe that deflation is bad. It's because the way they look at it is if you're in a deflationary economy, it's because people are engaging in less economic activity. There's fewer jobs, there's fewer, there's less job growth, there's less income growth, and as a result, people are buying fewer things, and that's why you're seeing deflation. So there can be a deflation in the context of this is a guy named Mark Perry who put this particular chart together from AEI, the University of Michigan Flint.
Do you know what really stood out to me on this?
Yep.
It is all the things that you need the most, that you have to have.
And where the government has been the most involved in destroying the market. So if you think about healthcare, the government heavily subsidizes in the US without regulating the price. And so the prices keep going up. College, we just did this $1 trillion bailout of higher ed where we're saying, okay, you can borrow as much as you want and the taxpayer will pay it for you. And what are universities going to do? They're going to raise their prices because they know that ultimately the taxpayer will pay the bill and neither the university nor the student will pay the bill. It's incredibly destructive. So all those areas of life where the government has said, we're just going to subsidize it, that's our brilliant solution to making things less expensive or to more affordable for you. You end up making things less affordable because the suppliers of those goods and services say, oh, you have a $10,000 subsidy to buy this. I'm just going to raise my prices by $10,000. That's how things work. So that's been incredibly damaging. Now, let's just step back. So there's two kinds of deflation, and this is the thing that a lot of the economists miss. There's good deflation and there's bad deflation. There's a deflation that comes from a sick economy where you're engaging in less economic activity. You're buying fewer things because you're poorer. That's the kind of deflation that people want to avoid. There's deflation that comes from competition and technological innovation and from improvements over time in the quality and productivity of businesses and of goods and services and of industries. That's good, right? The fact that your laptop can do more things at a lower price than it could before, that's deflation too, but that's good deflation, right? And the problem with economists is they're stuck in this 20th century model where they're not thinking about technology at all, right? They're not thinking about global trade. So the two biggest drivers of lower prices in the US over the last 50, 60 years have been technological innovation, which drives costs down on lots of things, and trade, right? So the fact that you can buy things from somewhere else where they have a comparative advantage in purchasing it or producing it makes it a lot less expensive for you to buy it. And so those are the two things that have counteracted the Fed. So the Fed has had this loose monetary policy, relatively speaking, for a long time. And they look at these statistics with their green eye shades and say, well, hey, inflation is low, so we can pump more money in the system. We're not causing inflation by pumping more money in the system. That's the way they think, because all they think about is inflation, interest rates as these two things that they can just manipulate at will. And that's not how it works. In reality, technology and trade are driving prices down, and that's good. That makes people's lives more affordable. And this gets to this point about why free op exists, right? Why does free op exist? Because this observation, this point about how cost of living, the rising cost of living, is essential for social mobility and increasing social mobility. It's not just about income growth. If you only focus on income growth, but you ignore the cost of living growth that goes alongside it when you flood the market with money, you haven't solved anything, right? So when the Fed floods the market with money and says, oh, this money is going to come to you eventually, trickle-down effect, maybe it will to a degree, but if the cost of your housing goes up, you buy even more, you're poorer in the end, right? Whereas if we focus on those two problems together, how do we grow the economy so your wages can grow, so your earnings can grow, but most importantly, that your disposable income can grow because you're paying less in taxes, you're paying less in cost of living, then you create a wealthier society. So deflation in that sense is good. A stronger dollar is effectively a kind of deflation, right? Because the dollar can buy more things. That's good. But it needs to be understood in the context of that's that microeconomic stuff where you're actually making the cost of living less expensive. You're not intervening with the Fed to artificially juice demand where the long-term effects, it's like a sugar high. You create the sugar high, everyone's happy for a minute, and then you crash.
But do you think there becomes a problem with the dollar becoming, other currencies devaluing too high against the dollar? And do you think that will lead to kind of another policy change to try and reduce the value of the dollar?
Well, it goes the other way right now in the sense that other countries have room to increase their rates, knowing that the U.S. is raising rates more aggressively. Usually the thing you worry about is competitive devaluation, it's called, where countries will reduce their rates to keep their currencies low in price relative to the others so that their exporters can be happy, right? It's kind of this lobbyist thing. The exporters talk to the government, and the government wants to do what the exporters want and forget about the average person who actually wants their currency to be strong so they can buy more things, so they have more purchasing power. So, there is risk of a global recession from aggressive interest rates, but that ignores the fact that, we've artificially juiced the economy. The economic growth we've had has been juiced by easy money, not by actual organic economic growth where industries have grown and produced more things more efficiently, right? So that's the problem is there's always a recession if you've artificially juiced economic growth through low interest rates, through quantitative easing, through all these easy money policies. And that's basically the Pied Piper. It's like, you eventually have to pay that price for what we've done. And so the UN can say, yes, please keep interest rates low. I mean, I think at the end of the day, the good news is Jay Powell doesn't have that view. He understands that inflation is a real problem. By the way, I wish, Danny, that we were worried about, if we were at a point where inflation was zero, then yes, we could have a very interesting argument about deflation. People had the same argument about interest rates. They said, well, you can never have a federal funds rate or a central bank interest rate below zero, because then that would create all these crazy effects in the economy that we can't understand. Well, the European Central Bank did it. Germany did it. They've had negative interest rates. It's not that hard. It just means you're paying people to spend money, paying people to borrow money.
Yeah,
right?
I think
That's
Japan
all you're
still
doing.
have negative interest rates.
Right. So we can, there's this term you hear in academic economic discussions and Fed wonk discussions say, well, there's this zero bound. You can't cross the zero bound because then the world will end. It's like you're going through the black hole or something like that. No, you can charge negative interest rates. It just means you're paying people to borrow money. And you can do that if you want. It's destructive, but you can do it. We shouldn't do it. We should be okay. And this is, I think, one of the things you were asking before. How do we solve the problems, or how do we address the errors of the Federal Reserve? One way to do it, and this is a big project, but one way to do it is to eliminate the stigma from negative inflation or deflation. That is to say, yes, there's the bad kind of deflation, but there's a good kind of deflation that comes from purchasing power going up and innovation and competition in the economy. The fact that clothing is less expensive today than it was 50 years ago is a good thing. It's not a bad thing.